And if you're emailing and are happy for us to contact you and maybe want to take part in the programme, do include your phone number in your message. We will bring you the latest on Brexit as well in a moment, but before that, a summary of the day's news so far. Here's Anita.
Thank you, Victoria. Good morning, everyone. MPs are to resume debating Theresa May's Brexit deal following a series of defeats for the government. Among them, ministers were found in contempt of Parliament after refusing to publish the full legal advice on the withdrawal agreement. Ministers will now respond by releasing it later this morning. A British academic says he felt like he was being mentally tortured when he was held in the United Arab Emirates on spying charges. Matthew Hedges spent months in prison before being jailed for life. He returned to the UK last month after being pardoned. In his first broadcast interview to the BBC, he described some of the treatment he endured.
There was no light. I wasn't allowed to do anything to try and distract myself.
You couldn't listen to a radio or anything of that sort?
Not until I had started the court case and my mental health had deteriorated quite substantially. Then I was allowed some form of distraction.
Were you shackled at all?
Yes, I was. Whenever I had to go to the bathroom or on occasion, use the shower, I would be escorted by 4 guards and I would wear ankle cuffs. Whenever I was transported between different premises, I was blindfolded and handcuffed.
Matthew Hedges. The Home Office is being accused of failing to act on repeated warnings about the impact its measures to curb illegal immigration would have on Windrush migrants. The National Audit Office has published a report claiming the department didn't take into account the possible impact on people originally from Commonwealth countries who were entitled to live in the UK. World leaders have been arriving in the United States to attend the state funeral of President George Bush Sr. later today in Washington National Cathedral. President Trump has declared today a national day of mourning. The former president died on Friday at the age of 94. His body has been lying in state where more than 26,000 people have paid their respects. The office investigating alleged Russian collusion in the 2016 US election has said it will not be pursuing a jail sentence for former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Mr. Flynn has admitted lying to the FBI, but in a memo, Special Counsel Robert Mueller said he had provided substantial assistance to prosecutors. President Donald Trump has called the investigation a witch hunt and denies any wrongdoing. Doctors in Brazil have revealed that for the first time, a healthy baby has been born to a woman using a womb transplanted from a dead donor. The 10-hour operation and the following fertility treatment took place in 2016. There have been nearly 40 womb transplants using a live donor, resulting in 11 babies. But the 10 previous transplants from a deceased donor had failed. And that's a summary of the latest news. Back to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Anita. Hello, good morning. There are 6 days to go until Parliament votes for or against Mrs May's Brexit deal. Will today be any better for the Prime Minister than yesterday? At around 11:30, the government will be publishing its full legal advice on Brexit. It was hoping to keep some of the advice private, but yesterday, as you know, ministers were found in contempt of Parliament and have been forced to make it all public. MPs also backed calls to give them a direct say in what happens if Mrs May's deal is rejected next week. And there'll be more debate today in the Commons about her deal. Let's talk to Norman. OK, where are we today, Norman?
Well, first off, I guess we just want to see how Mrs May copes, how she picks herself up off the floor after yesterday, because she's got to carry on, she's got to keep making her case to MPs, even though, to be honest, she seems to have pretty much run out of road. There doesn't seem to be any new arguments she can make to MPs to get them on board. The second thing we're watching now is whether basically things are happening around her. She's pretty much lost control, not just of her party, but maybe even of Brexit itself. And this really stems from the emergence of this sort of block of, call them sort of Tory centrist MP, party elders, greybeards. Well, I don't think any of them have got grey beards, but you get what I mean. These are experienced, respected figures in the party who yesterday ensured that if Mrs May's deal goes down in flames, then Parliament can step in to say, OK, this is what we should do now. So this is the kind of Plan B brigade. They are beginning to sketch out what should emerge from the wreckage of Mrs May's deal. And I think what we're going to see today is how much oomph they've got behind them, how united they are. Can they reach out to bring on board centrist Labour MPs, and how much of a game changer this is? So, you know, a lot of the talk now has gone beyond Mrs May's deal to Plan B. What is it? Can it work? Who's going to make it work? Albeit this morning, as you'd expect, cabinet ministers still digging in behind the Prime Minister. Here, Andrea Leadsom.
So I never do predictions, I never do them, so I'm not going to start now. But what I do want to say is the Prime Minister has shown such incredible tenacity and determination to get a deal that can bring together those on the Leave side and those on the Remain side of the argument. And she, you know, I don't believe that there would be anybody else who could work as hard as she has or as determinedly as she has to get this deal through. So I think she deserves our support.
Now, there is a view among some Tories that this Plan B amendment is a sort of Baldric-like cunning plot by Team May to terrify Tory Brexiteers into backing her deal, for fear if they don't, then there'll be some softer Plan B Brexit sorted out once her deal goes down. I have to say there is no sign at the moment of Tory Brexiteers buckling. They are adamant that Mrs May can and should get a better deal, and if she can't, it's no deal. So, here is the former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab.
I think if this deal is voted down, we make the changes that will be necessary to render this deal palatable in terms of the long-term interests of our country, our children, the next generation, and we also make clear that we're ramping up the preparations for no deal. We don't want that outcome, but we're not going to be bullied into submission, and I think that's the way we're most likely to get a sensible, pragmatic response from the EU, but we need to be willing to, as in any negotiation, to walk away if they're not going to continue to try and sense weakness in the UK and bully and blackmail us into submission to what are frankly appalling terms in the last analysis of this deal.
So there is a sense here, Vic, that MPs on all sides are beginning to prepare for life after Mrs May's deal goes down. And I think, you know, the other thing we learned yesterday from those 3 defeats is Mrs May's deal is almost certain to go down, because she lost yesterday on votes when, for one of them, she had the backing of Tory Brexiteers, and on the others, she had the backing of Tory Brexiteers and the DUP. Come next Tuesday, she will have the support of neither, which seems to me to suggest it's almost inconceivable to see how she can get this deal through.
OK, thank you very much, Norman. Let's speak to 3 Conservative MPs right now. Former Culture Minister Ed Vaizey. In Westminster is Vicky Ford. Also at Westminster, Bernard Jenkin. He is a member of the pro-Brexit Conservative backbench group calling itself the European Research Group. OK, well, let's begin by just confirming how you are voting next Tuesday, just to make sure none of you have changed your mind. Vicky Ford, will you be for or against Mrs May's deal?
I'll be supporting the Prime Minister's deal.
It's Bernard Jenkin.
I shall be voting against it.
Ed Vaizey.
I'm voting for it.
OK. Vicky Ford, are you expecting the Prime Minister to lose this vote?
I hope she doesn't lose.
No. I know you hope she doesn't. Are you expecting her deal to be voted down?
No, I think this is really serious. If it is voted down, then, as the Attorney General said yesterday, we're looking at utter chaos.
I'm asking you, are you expecting it to be voted down?
I'm not the Chief Whip. I am expecting us to have to vote for this deal, because if not, there's a huge risk.
I'll try once more. Are you expecting it to be voted down?
I am expecting to vote for that, and I hope that my colleagues who are saying they won't vote for it will change their minds between now and then.
OK. The fact that you won't answer the correct question directly tells us a lot. So, Bernard Jenkin, are you expecting it to be voted down?
Yes, because the DUP are not supporting this agreement, so not a single opposition MP is going to support this agreement. So if all the Conservative MPs voted for it, it would still not go through the House of Commons, and I don't know why some people can't do the maths.
Ed Vaizey, can you do the maths? Are you expecting Mrs May to lose on Tuesday?
Yes, although I remain weirdly optimistic that she might pull it out of the hat, but
is that based on any
logically,
evidence?
no, it's based on just sheer blind faith.
OK, right. So, if that does happen, if she loses, what we know is that Parliament has the keys to the car. It has the right to say what happens next. And there are obviously many different options. What do you say the options are, Ed Vaizey?
Well, I think there was a vote in Parliament yesterday which effectively allows Parliament to express its will, as it were. So assuming she loses this vote on Tuesday, which I think is significant. Bernard, as you'll find out in a minute, does not think it's significant, but I think it is. And I think it will be sort of first come, first serve. At the moment, the most realistic alternative to what Theresa May is proposing is what's called the Norway option, effectively joining what's called the European Free Trade Association.
Which would mean effectively being in the single market, paying annual financial contributions to the EU, not ending freedom of movement. In what way is that Brexit?
Well, it's formally leaving the EU, but I've always been in favour of a way of leaving the European Union that gives us, that minimises the impact on jobs, and the people who are advocating the Norway option regard it as a temporary stop before we move towards our free trade deal. The key, people forget about Theresa May's agreement, is that even if it was passed, it's not the end. It gets us out of the EU in as painless a way as possible before we negotiate a free trade arrangement with the EU. So the Norway option is similar, I think, to the withdrawal agreement. I think it's the most credible one. It has cross-party support. A lot of Labour MPs have backed that and would feel, I think, compelled to support it because they've been so vocal in support of it. But as I say,
do you accept it will be a betrayal of people who voted leave?
No, I don't. I think one of the great difficulties of this whole debate is that we've had to put up with the Brexiteers, first of all, not saying what they wanted during the referendum campaign. They all went into government. They all fled when it got difficult. They always say no, no, no to anything that's put forward as Brexit, but they never say what they actually want that's not going to be catastrophic for the British economy.
All right, so Bernard Jenkins was saying not true. How worried are you about a soft Brexit, a Norway? There may be a majority for that in Parliament.
Well, first of all, as you rightly say, the Norway Brexit is not Brexit because we'd have to stay in the customs union too. We couldn't do free trade deals. We wouldn't be taking back control of our laws and our money and our borders.
And how worried are you about getting that, then?
Well, the second point to make, which is that Norman Smith didn't quite explain this. There's a very, very big difference between the law and resolutions of Parliament. And yes, we're going to get a second meaningful vote, if you like, and people are going to be able to have their say. But Parliament has already passed all the laws necessary for us to leave the European Union. We're leaving on the 29th of March. Now, unless Parliament passes new laws, then we're leaving. Now, I don't think there's any consensus in Parliament as to what those new laws should be.
But there is a consensus against no deal.
Well, to some extent, that Parliament has already passed the buck on that. They have legislated for us to leave on the 29th.
I can tell you that your colleague Vicky Ford is absolutely shaking her head in disagreement with what you're saying.
Well, I'm just stating the facts.
Okay, Vicky Ford.
A resolution of Parliament does not change the law. The question you need to ask Vicky is how is Parliament going to change the law if the government won't bring forward legislation?
What's going to happen, Vicky Ford?
So no deal is not an attractive deal, and I don't believe it was what people were told that they would get when they voted Brexit. So how do you stop it?
How do you stop it?
I also want to come back, if I may, on the Norway.
No, in a moment, please. Let's do this in order. So how do you stop no deal?
So this is why I say if we go through the vote on Tuesday and it falls, then it is hugely keys to the Bank of England to Brussels.
Okay,
Norway is not a good deal for the UK.
How do you stop a no deal? You now this motion passed yesterday. This amendment went through. The government was defeated, which means that Parliament has a right to express an opinion about what happens next. If a majority in Parliament say they don't want a no deal, just explain to our audience how you would practically stop it.
Well, could I suggest that you ask Ed that question?
Oh my goodness, please answer the question, Vicky Ford.
He voted for that amendment yesterday. I see a hugely chaotic process.
But you just explained that you don't want a no deal.
Exactly. but I see a hugely chaotic process and a high risk of a no-deal Brexit if this vote does not go through on Tuesday. And I think Labour politicians are playing with fire if they think they will get a second chance to renegotiate this in Brussels.
Right.
Because their red lines cannot be met.
How would you stop a no-deal?
Well, I've no idea. I mean, the point is that we put in place this mechanism that allows Parliament to have its will. But, I mean, I think what Bernard says has some truth in it, that there are laws that are taking us inexorably to leaving the European Union. What really upsets me about Bernard's position is that the withdrawal agreement is the way of getting us out of the European Union, which is ostensibly what he's always backed all his life, in a way that doesn't harm people's jobs and our economy. And it then becomes an opportunity for him to negotiate the relationship with the European Union that he wants to see. But if we vote it down, there is a chance we get a no-deal Brexit. He will walk away from that and say it's not my fault, the government didn't prepare for this, the chaos and the misery that will be caused by it. Or alternatively, this resolution could provide Parliament with an opportunity to come together and say, this is what Parliament wants. This is the Brexit that Parliament wants. This is what a group of Labour MPs, a group of Tory MPs and others want. And force the government then to legislate for that to happen.
Bernard Jenkin, force the government to legislate. That's okay. Bernard Jenkin, how worried thank you. How worried are you about not getting Brexit at all?
I think that is such a crazy idea. I mean, the British people.
So you're not worried at all?
The British people want to leave the EU, and there is no doubt about that. Many politicians in Parliament and the EU are trying to bully the British people into thinking they are not allowed to. Actually, most countries aren't in the EU and they're completely fine. All these scare stories we've had before and have been proved to be wrong. France and
I don't want to go over the old argument.
Well, just a minute. This is important. France and other countries and the EU are already preparing for the possibility of what one might call a negotiated no-deal withdrawal. We could trade with the EU on WTO terms. It would be sensible for the EU and the UK to temporarily agree that there will be no tariffs pending the negotiation of a free trade agreement. And just a minute, this is very important. The idea that leaving without a withdrawal agreement is somehow jumping into an abyss is just another lie.
So
it is not true. We jump into a legal framework to trade with other countries. Most of our trade is done with other countries on WTO terms already.
Vicky Ford is...
What about the people who are living here in the UK from elsewhere in Europe, the Brits living elsewhere in Europe? Their lives and livelihoods are affected by this. The businesses who trade by Europe. The withdrawal agreement is the way to have an orderly exit. The other EU 27 countries have negotiated that in good faith, and they've told us, take this agreement or leave it. I don't know, Bernard, where you think you're going to get more from the EU leaders, because they've negotiated for 2 years and made this offer. So I just think throwing that back in their face right now is enormously high risk. The chance that you can have a new negotiation, I've been speaking to businesses,
let him respond now,
real
please,
cliff edges, real jobs and decisions which are going to need to be made before Christmas about jobs and livelihoods in my constituency, in your constituency, if we vote against this on Tuesday. And I'm not going to put people's jobs at risk.
These are all the same industries that said we had to join the euro, and thank goodness we didn't do that. These are all the industries that campaigned to remain, and we voted to leave.
People in my constituency have lost jobs.
And the key point here is that, of course, we would guarantee the rights of EU citizens in our own country because we're a civilised country. And actually, I think the rest of the European Union is made up of civilised countries. They would not want to spite the rights of British citizens living in their countries. And the idea that the EU can hold these people hostage in order to blackmail us to sign an agreement which we could not subsequently leave is stuck in the backstop seems to put the UK in a much weaker position to negotiate a free trade deal than if we left without an agreement.
Okay, we don't know what's going to happen. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen on Tuesday, although people are predicting, so many people predicting that Mrs May will lose this vote. I'm tempted to ask, how do we bring the country back together again? But I suspect you will not have answers to that either.
That's a very important question, and we should. We should be talking to each other, and you've got 3 MPs in front of your cameras who are all good friends.
Yes.
Are you?
Yes.
You don't sound like it.
Bizarrely, we are, although I do wish Bernard would keep stopping using language like hostage, submission, blackmail. I mean, we need to be friends with Europe after all this.
Of course.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. The three good friends. Thank you.
Imagine what three enemies would look like.
Absolutely. Your views, of course, welcome. Also coming up on the programme, we're going to meet a bunch of biohackers. They insert magnets and microchips under their skin to try and improve their lives. This woman wants to use hers to open her car door.
Then the moment of truth for Raven. Does it actually work?
Cool, so now I'm approaching my NFC tag.
Yes,
it's working! Nice.
That's after 10:30, and also officially homeless. 9-year-old Nevaeh Seeley is sleeping on a sofa in her grandma's front room, while her mum, Limara, who works full-time, sleeps across from her on another sofa. They are here to describe how they're in this situation, one they never thought would affect a family like theirs. Next, the Home Office has been accused this morning of not heeding repeated warnings about the impact on the Windrush generation of its measures to curb illegal immigration. The Windrush generation is a term for British people who arrived to the UK from Caribbean countries before 1973, some of whom have been wrongly detained, denied their rights and even deported under what has been called the government's hostile environment agenda. The report today from the National Audit Office found that many of those who've lost out financially as a result of the Windrush scandal still haven't been repaid. It said that the government failed to protect their rights to live, work and access services in the UK, and many have suffered distress and material loss as a result. This was both predictable and forewarned. And it said that people from other Commonwealth countries have been neglected in the government's response to the crisis, saying the department's taking steps to put things right for the Caribbean community, but it's shown a surprising lack of urgency to identify other groups that may have been affected. We're going to talk now to Nick Monaghan, who was born in Nigeria, has lived here for 40 years and served more than a decade in the British Army. He's now £15,000 in debt because he was forced out of work while having to apply for a passport. Also with us, Gus John, who came here from Grenada in the 1960s. He was invited to Downing Street for the Windrush anniversary celebration, but wrote back saying it would be a betrayal to attend. Thank you both for talking to us. You wrote to Theresa May saying actually it would be a shameful betrayal to accept. Why did you say that?
For the reasons that the National Audit Office has given. What they have not said in the report is that many people have died as a result of this hostile environment.
How do you know that?
Families have said, they did it to the Home Office themselves, people who have gone back to the Caribbean and have perished because they were receiving treatment here for quite serious diseases or conditions, which was withdrawn, and as a consequence of that, not being able to access the same medical treatment where they were deported to, they've died.
Do you know how many people have died as a result?
Well, I'm told by those who've been monitoring this within communities that it's up to about 13 people.
Right.
Now, I believe that is quite important, you see, because one of the things that the report has not said, I don't think they've used the word, from what I've read, I don't think they've used the word human rights once. But this, it seems to me, is to be a complete betrayal, denial of people's human rights.
Let me bring in Nick. If you could concisely sum up for our audience the situation you found yourself in, Nick.
Well, yes. I came to United Kingdom in February 1963. I was about 6 months old. I came on my mother's passport. And I lived a normal childhood. I joined the army from school, and I had no problems joining the army. While serving in the army, I had to apply for a passport, which was turned down first time, but on my commanding officer's urging, it was finally issued. And then I didn't think anything of it, and I just carried on living my life normally until February 2016, when I'd lost my passport, but I was told I had to produce a passport to prove I had the right to work in the United Kingdom. after several visits to the passport office and just refused out of hand because I couldn't produce an English birth certificate, that they just kept refusing.
And is it
and
true,
if
Nick,
it wasn't for the plight of...
Sorry, did you get...
Say again, sorry?
Did you get fired from your job because your firm was fined for illegally employing you because you didn't have a passport?
Yes. Yes, my firm, bless them, they hang on to me for as long as possible, but I don't know if they're actually fined, but they were threatened with a fine,
right.
And my contract was terminated, and I haven't worked since.
And so the report today from the government spending watchdog, the NAO, effectively says, I mean, there are a number of criticisms, but it suggests that the targets that the Home Office had for removing illegal immigrants would have influenced how enforcement staff carried out their work in a way that may have increased the risk of wrongful removals. Do you agree with that, Nick?
Yes, I do, yes. When this first happened, we used to laugh and joke, because where could they send me? Could they back to Nigeria? I have no family, no nothing out there. And then when it wasn't funny anymore and it got very, very serious, I genuinely worried. I had depression. And if it wasn't for a very, very kind landlord, I would have been homeless.
Right.